Commander Thekvar's massive claws scraped against the metal deck plating as he paced the security office aboard the interstellar research vessel, Claw of Stars. His golden fur bristled with anxiety, and his black nose twitched as he tried to catch any scent of the missing younglings. As the ship's head of security and a proud member of the Ursani race, losing 7 cubs under his watch was beyond unacceptable. It was a catastrophe that could end his career and bring shame to his entire bloodline. The Ursani were a formidable species, standing nearly 9 feet tall when fully grown, with thick fur and powerful builds that had earned them respect throughout the galaxy as excellent warriors and protectors. Their cubs were precious beyond measure, especially on a research vessel where only the most accomplished families were permitted to bring their young on extended missions. "Report," Thekvar growled to his second-in-command. Lieutenant Mordon, whose smaller frame still towered over most other species on the ship. "Sir, we've searched every accessible area of the ship twice. The cubs vanished sometime during the night cycle. No sign of forced entry, no indication of struggle. Security cameras show them entering the communal play area yesterday evening, but after that..." Mordon's ears flattened against his skull. "Nothing." Thekvar's hearts pounded with increasing panic. 7 cubs, ranging in age from 4 to 8 standard years, simply didn't disappear without a trace. The youngest was his own nephew, Kiptar, a tiny ball of silver fur who could barely reach Thekvar's knee. The thought of anything happening to him made the commander's vision blur with rage and fear. "Have you checked the restricted sections?" Thekvar demanded. "Everyone, sir. Engineering, the armory, even the waste processing units. We've alerted every department head and searched their quarters with permission." Mordan hesitated. "There is one section we haven't fully investigated." Thekvar's ears perked forward. "Which one?" "The human research quarters. Dr. Sarah Chen and her team requested minimal security presence during their work on that consciousness study. Something about not wanting to contaminate their research environment with too many variables." The commander's lip curled back, revealing impressive fangs. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having joined the research consortium only 5 years ago. Most species regarded them as curious but harmless, small, weak creatures with no claws, fangs, or natural armor. They seemed to spend most of their time asking endless questions and making detailed observations about everything around them. But Thekvar had heard whispers from other security chiefs. Stories about human unpredictability, about their strange emotional responses and illogical protective instincts. Some claimed humans were dangerous precisely because they were so different from other civilized species. "Get a team together," Thekvar commanded. "We searched the human quarters immediately." As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Thekvar couldn't shake his growing dread. The human section was located in one of the quieter areas of the vessel, away from the main activity centers. It had seemed like a logical place to house the small research team when they'd first come aboard. But now it felt isolated and suspicious. The corridor leading to the human quarters was dimmer than the rest of the ship, designed to accommodate the humans' preference for softer lighting. Thekvar's enhanced night vision allowed him to see perfectly, but the shadows seemed to writhe with possibilities of what they might find. When they reached the first human quarters, Thekvar raised his massive fist to pound on the door, but Mordon caught his arm. "Sir, listen." Thekvar tilted his head, his sensitive ears picking up sounds from within the human quarters. What he heard made no sense at all. Instead of the screams or signs of struggle he had feared, there were soft rhythmic sounds, almost like breathing. Peaceful breathing. Dr. Chen's voice came through the door's communication system before they could announce themselves. "Commander Thekvar? Is that you? Please come in quietly. Don't wake them." The door slid open with a soft hiss and Thekvar stepped inside, his security team close behind. What he saw stopped him dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping open in complete bewilderment. The human quarters had been transformed into something that defied all logic and military protocol. Soft blankets and pillows were scattered across the floor in careful arrangements. Small lights cast a warm, gentle glow throughout the room. And there, nestled in the center of it all, were all 7 missing Ursani cubs. They were fast asleep. But they weren't just sleeping. They were sleeping like Thekvar had never seen Ursani young sleep before. Usually, cubs slept in defensive positions, curled tight with their backs to walls or corners, ready to spring awake at the first sign of danger. It was an instinct bred into their species over millions of years of evolution. These cubs were sprawled out, completely relaxed, their bellies exposed, their limbs loose and peaceful. Little Kiptar was curled up against Dr. Chen herself, his tiny paws clutching her shirt while she sat propped against the wall, her own eyes closed in sleep. "What?" Tekvar began. But Dr. Chen raised a finger to her lips. "Please," she whispered. "They've been sleeping like this for hours. I've never seen anything like it." Tekvar stared at the scene, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His nephew, the most anxious and fearful of all the cubs, was sleeping more peacefully than Tekvar had ever witnessed. The other cubs were similarly relaxed, their breathing deep and even. "How did they get here?" he whispered back. Dr. Chen smiled softly. "They found us." Dr. Sarah Chen carefully extracted herself from beneath little Kiptar, moving with the practiced precision of someone who had clearly done this before. The tiny cub mumbled in his sleep but didn't wake, instead curling up against a soft pillow that smelled faintly of human scent. Tekvar watched in amazement as his usually hyper-vigilant nephew remained completely relaxed. "We need to talk outside," Dr. Chen whispered, gesturing toward the corridor, but quietly. "If we wake them now, it might undo hours of progress." Tekvar found himself nodding, though every instinct screamed at him to scoop up the cubs and carry them back to the safety of the Ursani quarters. As they stepped into the hallway, he couldn't help but look back at the peaceful scene. His security team wore expressions of equal bewilderment. Once the door closed behind them, Tekvar's confusion exploded into questions. "Dr. Chen, what exactly is happening here? How did 7 Ursani cubs end up in your quarters? Why aren't they afraid? What have you done to them?" Dr. Chen held up her hands in a calming gesture, though Tekvar noticed she didn't seem intimidated by his bulk or aggressive posture. Most species showed at least some fear when confronted by an agitated Ursani warrior, but the human remained remarkably composed. "Commander, I understand your concern, but I need you to know that nothing harmful has happened to your cubs. In fact, what we've witnessed might be one of the most significant discoveries in interspecies behavioral science in decades." She activated a small recording device, and holographic images filled the corridor. The timestamp showed the previous evening, just after the night cycle had begun. Tekvar watched as the 7 cubs moved through the ship's corridors, but not randomly. They were following something. "Our research team has been studying sleep patterns and stress responses in various species," Dr. Chen explained as the recording played. "We've noticed that proximity to humans seems to have an unusual calming effect on many alien children, though we weren't sure why." The recording showed the cubs approaching the human quarters, but instead of the typical wariness young Ursani displayed around strangers, they seemed drawn forward by something invisible. Kiptar, usually the most timid, was actually leading the group. They followed the scent trail, Tekvar realized, his security training kicking in. But why? Cubs are taught from birth to avoid unfamiliar scents. "That's exactly what makes this so remarkable," Dr. Chen said, her eyes lighting up with scientific excitement. "We believe humans produce certain pheromones and biochemical markers that trigger relaxation responses in young mammals. It's an evolutionary trait that helped our species survive when we were developing on Earth." The recording continued, showing the cubs somehow managing to open the door to the human quarters. Tekvar made a mental note to review the security protocols. Those doors should have been locked to unauthorized personnel. How did they get inside? Lieutenant Mordan asked. Dr. Chen looked slightly embarrassed. "We left the door unlocked. My colleague, Dr. Rodriguez, had been having trouble sleeping due to the ship's vibrations. We thought some fresh air circulation might help." She paused. "When the cubs found us, they were clearly distressed. Scared, anxious, probably having nightmares like many young creatures do in unfamiliar environments." The holographic recording showed the cubs entering the human quarters hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Tekvar watched in astonishment as his nephew, who normally hid behind adults when meeting new people, walked directly up to Dr. Chen and sat down beside her. "What did you do?" Tekvar asked, his voice softer now as he saw the gentleness with which the human researcher had responded to the frightened cubs. "What any caregiver would do," Dr. Chen replied simply. "We made them feel safe. Dr. Rodriguez and I have both raised children. We recognize the signs of anxiety and fear, so we did what comes naturally to humans when we encounter distressed young ones." The recording showed Dr. Chen and her colleague creating the soft, comfortable environment Thekvar had discovered. They gathered blankets and pillows, dimmed the lights to a warm glow, and then simply sat with the cubs. No force, no restraints, no commands, just presence and patience. But they're not your species, Thekvar protested. How could you possibly know what they needed? Dr. Chen smiled, and for the first time, Thekvar caught a glimpse of something profound in her expression. Commander, one of the things that makes humans unique in the galaxy is our ability to recognize and respond to distress in almost any young creature. We call it parental instinct, but it extends far beyond our own offspring. The recording showed the cubs gradually relaxing, their defensive postures melting away as they settled into the comfortable space the humans had created. One by one, they had fallen asleep in positions that would have horrified any Ursani parent, completely vulnerable and trusting. This is impossible, Mordan muttered. Cubs don't behave this way with strangers. It goes against every survival instinct our species has developed. That's exactly why this is so significant, Dr. Chen said. We think humans might be the first species the Ursani young have encountered that registers as genuinely safe at a biological level. Our scent, our behavior patterns, our stress responses, they all signal protector rather than threat to mammalian young. Thekvar stared at the door to the human quarters, his mind reeling. Inside, his nephew was sleeping more peacefully than he ever had in his own bed, in the arms of an alien species he'd met less than 12 hours ago. Everything about the situation should have terrified him, but instead he found himself feeling something entirely unexpected. Relief. 3 hours later, Thekvar found himself in the ship's medical bay, staring at readings that challenged everything he thought he knew about Ursani physiology. Dr. Martinez, the ship's chief medical officer, was a Zeltharian with 4 arms and compound eyes that could analyze biological data faster than most computers. She had been studying the scans taken of the sleeping cubs with increasing amazement. Commander, I've never seen stress hormone levels this low in Ursani young, Dr. Martinez said, her voice carrying the clicks and whistles of her native language. Their cortisol production has dropped to nearly adult levels. Their heart rates are optimal, and their brain activity suggests the deepest, most restorative sleep cycle possible. Thekvar examined the holographic displays showing the cubs' vital signs. The data was undeniable. Every single physiological marker indicated that the cubs were not just safe, but experiencing a level of well-being that exceeded anything typically seen in their species. What about the humans? Are they doing something to them? Some kind of chemical influence? Dr. Martinez's compound eyes swiveled to focus on him. I scanned the humans as well. They're producing elevated levels of oxytocin and dopamine, biochemicals associated with bonding and protective behavior. But there's no evidence of any artificial manipulation or substances being used. The medical bay's doors slid open, and Dr. Chen entered with her colleague, Dr. Rodriguez. Both humans looked tired but alert, and Thekvar noticed they both carried the lingering scent of Ursani cubs, a sweet, warm smell that usually only parents bore. Commander, Dr. Chen said, we've been monitoring the cubs remotely through our research equipment. They're still sleeping peacefully, but we think you should know something important. Dr. Rodriguez activated a portable display unit. We've been recording their sleep patterns, and what we're seeing is unprecedented. Normal Ursani cubs wake up an average of 12 times per night cycle, due to evolutionary alertness responses. These cubs haven't stirred once in 4 hours. Thekvar felt his protective instincts warring with the evidence before him. That could be dangerous. What if there's an actual threat? What if they're too deeply asleep to respond to danger? That's what's so remarkable about human caregiver behavior, Dr. Chen explained. We don't just calm the young, we take on the responsibility of staying alert for them. While the cubs sleep, our nervous systems actually become more vigilant, not less. Dr. Martinez confirmed this with her scans. The human's adrenaline and norepinephrine levels show they're in a state of relaxed alertness. Their bodies are prepared to respond instantly to any threat, while maintaining a calm presence that keeps the cubs peaceful. The implications began to sink in for Thekvar. You mean you're acting as their guardians? Taking over their survival instincts so they can rest completely? It's not conscious, Dr. Rodriguez admitted. It's just how we're built. When humans encounter young creatures in distress, we instinctively create what we call a safe space, an environment where the young can completely let down their defenses. because we've assumed responsibility for their protection. Thekvar thought about his own species, child-rearing practices. Orsani parents were loving but cautious, always teaching cubs to remain alert, to trust slowly, to be ready for danger. It was a survival strategy that had served them well for millennia. But it came at a cost. Their young lived in a constant state of low-level anxiety. "Show me the brain scans again," he requested. Dr. Martinez displayed the neural activity patterns of the sleeping cubs. The areas associated with fear, anxiety, and hypervigilance were almost completely quiet. Instead, the regions responsible for memory consolidation, growth hormone production, and emotional development were highly active. "This is the kind of brain activity we see in cubs only during the safest moments," Dr. Martinez explained. "Usually when they're in their birth dens with both parents present and no external threats for vast distances." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Commander, we think this might be why human children develop so differently from most galactic species. Our young are born completely helpless, but they're also born into an environment of absolute security. Human adults are biologically programmed to create these safe spaces, which allows our children to dedicate all their energy to learning and growth instead of survival." The pieces were beginning to fall into place for Thekvar. Humans weren't just different. They were different in a way that specifically benefited the young of other species. Their evolution had created beings who could provide a level of security that allowed true rest and development. "But why?" he asked. "What evolutionary advantage does this give humans?" Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "Think about it, Commander. A species that can calm and protect the young of other species would have advantages in forming alliances, in being trusted, in building relationships across species barriers. It's not just about our own children. It's about being the kind of species others want to have around their most precious members." Thekvar felt a chill of recognition. Throughout galactic history, the most successful species had been those that could form strong alliances. But those alliances were typically based on shared interests, mutual benefit, or fear. What the humans possessed was something far more powerful: the ability to trigger instinctive trust at the deepest biological level. A soft chime from Dr. Chen's communicator interrupted his thoughts. She checked the device and smiled. "One of the cubs is starting to wake up. Kiptar, I think. He's asking for water and something called morning fruit." Thekvar's heart skipped. His nephew was not only safe, he was comfortable enough to make requests of alien caregivers. The level of trust required for such behavior was staggering. "I need to see him," Thekvar said, and was surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. As they made their way back to the human quarters, Thekvar found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about strength, protection, and what it truly meant to keep the young safe. When the door to the human quarters slid open, Thekvar witnessed something that would forever change his understanding of his own species. Little Kiptar was sitting up among the blankets, his silver fur sleep mussed and his large dark eyes bright with contentment rather than the usual wariness. When he saw his uncle, instead of the automatic defensive posture Thekvar expected, Kiptar stretched his small arms above his head and yawned, a gesture of complete relaxation that Ursani cubs rarely displayed outside their family dens. "Uncle Thek," Kiptar called out happily, scrambling to his feet and running over with none of his usual hesitation. "Did you meet Dr. Sarah? She makes the best sleeping place ever." Thekvar knelt down as his nephew crashed into him with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Usually Kiptar was cautious even with family members, requiring several minutes of gentle coaxing before he would approach. This immediate joyful contact was unprecedented. "I was worried about you, little one," Thekvar said, carefully examining his nephew for any signs of distress or manipulation. What he found instead was a cub who appeared healthier and more vibrant than he had in months. Around them, the other cubs were beginning to stir. Thekvar watched in fascination as they woke up slowly and peacefully, stretching and yawning instead of bolting upright in the alert, defensive manner typical of their species. Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez moved among them with practiced ease, offering water and small snacks, their movements calm and non-threatening. "Dr. Sarah taught us about human sleeping," Kiptar explained excitedly. "They call it deep rest, and it makes you grow bigger and smarter. And look!" He held up a small device that Thekvar recognized as a human data pad. She showed us pictures of Earth animals that sleep just like we did. Tekvar accepted the device and found himself looking at images of various Earth creatures, bears, wolves, large cats, sleeping in relaxed positions with their young. The similarity to how the Ursani cubs had been sleeping was unmistakable. "Your nephew is remarkably intelligent," Dr. Chen said quietly, approaching them. "All the cubs are. They've been asking sophisticated questions about human behavior, Earth biology, and comparative psychology. Their minds seem much more active when they're not constantly monitoring for threats." This observation struck Tekvar like a physical blow. How much potential had his species been limiting by maintaining constant vigilance? How much learning and growth were Ursani cubs missing? Because their minds were always partially focused on survival. "Uncle, can we sleep with the humans again tonight?" Kipter asked, his voice carrying a hopeful tone that Tekvar rarely heard from any Ursani young. "Dr. Rodriguez said they have stories about Earth animals and that sharing stories before sleep makes the dreams better." Tekvar looked around the room at the other cubs, all of whom were now awake and displaying similar signs of contentment and curiosity. Their parents would be frantic with worry, but here were their children, healthier and happier than they had ever been in their short lives. "We should contact their families," Tekvar said to Dr. Chen. "They'll want to know their cubs are safe." "Of course," she agreed. "But Commander, I hope you'll consider allowing us to continue this research. What we're learning could revolutionize child development practices across multiple species." Before Tekvar could respond, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from the bridge. Captain Zorvak's deep voice filled the room. "Security Chief Tekvar, report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." Tekvar's warrior instincts immediately kicked in, but he found himself reluctant to leave the cubs. Dr. Chen seemed to sense his conflict. "They'll be safe with us," she assured him. "Dr. Martinez has cleared us to continue supervised interaction, and we've established communication with the cubs' parents. They're welcome to visit any time." As Tekvar made his way to the bridge, his mind raced with the implications of what he had witnessed. The humans had accomplished in one night what the most advanced Ursani child psychologists had been trying to achieve for years. They had created an environment where cubs could experience true rest and uninhibited learning. The bridge was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Captain Zorvak, a massive Crucian with armored skin and 6 arms, turned to face him with obvious relief. "Tekvar, thank the stars. We've received communications from 17 different species requesting emergency consultation about human interaction with their young. Apparently, word has spread about what happened with our cubs." The main view screen displayed a queue of incoming messages from across the galaxy. Tekvar read the subject lines with growing amazement. "Volcari younglings seek human contact. Aquan spawn exhibit unusual behavior around human researchers. Crystalline offspring showing unprecedented development near human colonies. Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're also receiving requests from child development experts, xenobiologists, and even government officials. The Human Research Council is asking for permission to establish formal study protocols." Captain Zorvak's mandibles clicked with what Tekvar recognized as deep thought. "It seems our human guests have stumbled onto something significant. The question is, what do we do about it?" Tekvar thought about Kiptar's bright eyes, the peaceful sleep of the cubs, and the gentle competence of the human researchers. "Sir, I recommend we support the research. What the humans have discovered could benefit countless young beings across the galaxy. And you're comfortable with this? As head of security?" Tekvar considered the question carefully. Every instinct he had been trained to follow said that allowing alien species access to their most vulnerable members was dangerous. But the evidence was undeniable. The humans weren't a threat to the young. They were something far more remarkable. They were protectors who could protect even those not their own. "Sir, I believe the humans represent a new kind of security. Not just physical protection, but psychological and developmental safety. If we can understand and replicate their methods, we could give all our young the chance to reach their full potential." Captain Zorvak's expression was unreadable, but Tekvar could see the wheels turning behind his ancient eyes. "Very well, but this research will be conducted under the strictest protocols. The safety of the young always comes first." As Tekvar returned to check on the cubs, he realized that everything was about to change. Not just for the Ursani, but for every species that encountered humanity's unique gift for creating safety in an often dangerous universe. 2 weeks later, the research vessel Claw of Stars had transformed into something resembling a floating daycare center, though calling it that would have horrified most of the adult aliens aboard. Representatives from dozens of species had arrived to observe the human research team's work, and the results were beyond anything the scientific community had imagined possible. Tekvar stood in what had once been a standard conference room, now converted into an observation deck, overlooking the expanded research area. Below him, Dr. Chen and her team worked with young beings from 7 different species, each group displaying behaviors that defied centuries of established knowledge about alien child development. The Volcari younglings, typically aggressive and territorial even in infancy, were peacefully sharing toys with Ursani cubs. Aquan spawn, who normally required constant immersion in specialized breathing fluids, were spending hours in air-filled environments simply to remain close to the human researchers. Most remarkably, 3 young crystalline beings, entities that usually communicated only through harmonic resonance, were attempting to mimic human speech patterns. The neural plasticity readings are off the charts, Dr. Martinez reported, her forearms moving rapidly across multiple data displays. These younglings are learning at rates 30 to 40% higher than their baseline measurements. The humans aren't just providing comfort, they're optimizing the learning environment for multiple species simultaneously. Ambassador Velthara, a elegant Etherian whose species had been studying child development for thousands of years, floated beside Tekvar in obvious bewilderment. This shouldn't be possible. Each species has evolved unique requirements for optimal young development. The humans can't possibly be meeting all of them. But they are, observed Dr. Kethmore, the galaxy's leading expert on comparative psychology. The ancient Zeltharian's compound eyes reflected data streams as he analyzed the situation. The humans aren't trying to meet each species' specific needs. They're addressing something more fundamental, the universal requirements of developing minds, safety, stimulation, and social connection. Through the observation window, Thekevar watched his nephew Kiptar working on a puzzle alongside a young Volcari named Shendar. Under normal circumstances, the 2 species would barely tolerate each other's presence, but here they were cooperating naturally, even communicating through a mixture of gestures and simple words that Dr. Chen had apparently taught them. How do they know what to do? Thekevar asked, voicing the question that had been bothering him for days. The humans receive no special training for working with alien young. They just adapt. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the conversation through the observation deck's communication system, looked up from where she was reading a story to a mixed group of younglings. Commander, may I explain something about human evolutionary history? The assembled scientists turned their attention to her, and Thekevar noticed that even the most senior researchers listened with the respect usually reserved for academic peers, despite Dr. Rodriguez being from a species most considered primitive. On Earth, humans evolved in environments with many different species of young mammals. Our survival often depended on understanding and responding appropriately to the needs of various creatures. A human who could calm a frightened wolf pup might gain the pack's protection. Someone who could nurture abandoned young from other species could trade them for resources or use them for specific tasks. She gestured to the mixed group of alien younglings around her, all listening attentively to her words despite the story being in a language none of them had known 2 weeks ago. But more importantly, human communities were successful when they could integrate individuals from different tribes, different backgrounds, different ways of thinking. Our children learned alongside others who might look different, speak differently, even think differently. We developed the ability to recognize and nurture potential regardless of its form. Ambassador Velthara's ethereal form shimmered with what Thekevar recognized as deep contemplation. You're suggesting that humans evolved to be universal caregivers, that your species developed the ability to optimize development in any young creature, not just your own. Not just caregivers, Dr. Chen corrected gently, never stopping her patient work with a young crystalline who was attempting to form its first solid sound. Recognizers of potential. Human societies thrived when they could identify and develop talent wherever they found it. A child who thought differently wasn't a problem to be corrected. They were a resource to be cultivated. The implications of this statement sent ripples of shock through the assembled scientists. Most galactic species focused on producing offspring that conformed to established patterns. Variation was often seen as a problem to be minimized rather than a strength to be encouraged. "Observe this," Dr. Kethmore said, highlighting a section of his data. "The young Aquan, Riptal, has been struggling with spatial reasoning tasks that should be simple for her species. Watch what happens when Dr. Chen works with her." On the screens, they could see Dr. Chen sitting with the young Aquan, who was attempting to solve a three-dimensional puzzle that involved rotating crystalline structures into alignment. Riptal's tentacles moved frustratedly, as she failed repeatedly at combinations that her species typically mastered easily. Instead of correcting her technique or showing her the standard approach, Dr. Chen simply observed. After several minutes, she handed Riptal a different type of puzzle, one that required sequential pattern recognition rather than spatial manipulation. The young Aquan's entire demeanor changed. Her tentacles moved with sudden confidence and precision, solving the pattern puzzle in moments. Dr. Chen smiled and began showing her how the same sequential thinking skills could be applied to the spatial puzzle, just from a different angle. "Remarkable," Ambassador Velthera whispered. The human recognized that the child's mind works differently and adapted the learning approach rather than forcing conformity. "That's exactly what makes this so revolutionary," Dr. Martinez said. "The humans aren't just providing care, they're providing individualized optimization. Each young being is developing along their own optimal path rather than being forced into species standard patterns." Tekvar watched his nephew successfully teach a complicated Ursani game to his new multi-species friends, explaining the rules with patience and creativity that no adult had ever nurtured in him before. Kipter wasn't just learning, he was becoming a teacher himself, discovering abilities that might never have emerged in a traditional Ursani upbringing. The question now, Captain Zorvak's voice came through the communication system, is how do we share this knowledge with the galaxy? And more importantly, how do we ensure it's used responsibly? Tekvar looked around at the gathering of some of the galaxy's greatest minds, all focused on the simple miracle happening in the room. Below, different species learning and growing together under the gentle guidance of beings who had somehow evolved to bring out the best in anyone's children. The answer, he realized, would reshape the future of child development across the known universe. 6 months after the initial incident, Tekvar stood in the newly constructed Human Development Center aboard Station Nexus Prime, the galaxy's largest civilian research facility. What had begun as a simple missing cub situation had evolved into the most significant advancement in interspecies relations in recorded history. The center hummed with activity as beings from over 100 different worlds worked together to understand and implement what the scientific community had begun calling the human protocol, the tide. Transformation was visible everywhere. Young beings who had once been considered developmentally delayed or socially incompatible were thriving under human guidance. Species that had been isolated for generations due to their unusual offspring behavior were now actively participating in galactic society. Most remarkably, children from traditionally hostile species were growing up as friends, their natural prejudices never forming in the first place. "Commander," Dr. Chen called out as she approached, now wearing the insignia of Director of Interspecies Development Research. "The council meeting is about to begin. Are you ready for this?" Tekvar adjusted his own new uniform. He had been promoted to head of Youth Safety Protocol for the entire Galactic Research Consortium. His nephew Kiptar, now confident and articulate beyond his years, served as one of the youth ambassadors helping to design programs for newly contacted species, as ready as anyone can be to change the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. He replied with a rumbling laugh that would have been impossible for him to produce 6 months ago. Working with the humans had changed him too, making him more adaptable, more open to possibilities he never would have considered. The council chambers contained representatives from 347 different species, the largest gathering in galactic history. What made it even more remarkable was that 20% of the attendees were younglings, children who had been deemed mature enough by human assessment standards to contribute to policy discussions about their own futures. Chancellor Zephyrin, the ancient Etherian who led the Galactic Council, opened the session with words that would be remembered for millennia. "We gather today to discuss the most significant evolutionary leap in our recorded history. Not technological, not biological, but social. The humans have shown us that our potential as individual species pales compared to our potential as a collaborative galactic community. The main display showed statistics that still amazed Tekvar every time he saw them. Learning rates among multi-species youth groups were averaging 400% above single-species control groups. Innovation in technology, art, and social solutions had increased exponentially in communities that had adopted human development protocols. Most importantly, incidents of interspecies conflict had dropped to near zero in regions where children were being raised with human methods. However, the Chancellor continued, we face unprecedented challenges. The demand for human guidance far exceeds the available population. There are currently over 10,000 requests for human development specialists with only 300 trained humans available. Dr. Chen stood to address the assembly. Honorable representatives, this brings us to the purpose of today's session. We believe the solution isn't to train more humans. It's to understand the principles behind human behavior and teach them to other species. A ripple of excitement and concern passed through the assembly. The Volcari delegation stirred restlessly, their warrior culture struggling with concepts that seemed to contradict everything they believed about strength and survival. Director Chen, war leader Korath growled, his scarred hide bearing the marks of countless battles. Are you suggesting that we abandon our own cultural methods of raising our young? Before Dr. Chen could respond, a small voice piped up from the youth section. Uncle Korath, may I answer? The assembly turned in shock to see Shendar, the young Volcari who had been part of the original research group. At 8 years old, he should have been cowering in the presence of so many adults. But instead he stood confidently, his natural Volcari aggression tempered by human-taught empathy. Shendar speaks for the youth perspective, Chancellor Zephyrin announced, though even his ancient composure showed surprise at the young Volcari's boldness. Uncle Korath, the humans didn't take away my Volcari strength, Shendar said clearly. They helped me understand that real strength means protecting and helping others grow stronger too. I can still fight. Dr. Sarah taught me that knowing when not to fight makes the times you do fight more meaningful. The young Volcari gestured to his multi-species friends in the youth section. And look, now I have allies from dozens of worlds. When I grow up, I won't just be a Volcari warrior. I'll be a leader who can work with anyone. War leader Korath stared at his young relative for a long moment, then slowly nodded. The boy speaks wisdom beyond his years, perhaps. Perhaps strength is not just about individual power. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, carrying a device that projected holographic learning modules. What we're proposing isn't the abandonment of cultural identity, it's the enhancement of it. Each species has unique strengths and perspectives. Human methods help those strengths develop more fully while also building bridges between different ways of thinking. The display showed case studies from dozens of worlds. Aquan children who had learned human emotional recognition were becoming better leaders in their underwater cities. Crystalline youth taught human creativity, were producing art that resonated across species barriers. Even the logical Zeltharians were discovering that human-style emotional development actually enhanced their analytical capabilities. The data is clear, Dr. Kethmore reported. Species that maintain their cultural identity while incorporating human development principles show enhanced performance in every measurable category. Tekvar stood, representing the security perspective. 6 months ago, I believed my job was to protect our young from outside influences. The humans taught me that true protection means giving children the tools to thrive in any environment they might face. He gestured to the mixed group of younglings. Look at them. They haven't lost their species' identities. They've gained the ability to be themselves more fully while also connecting with others. That's not weakness. That's the ultimate evolutionary advantage. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, and more importantly, the children themselves were advocates for the change. Species after species voted to implement pilot programs based on human development principles. As the session concluded, Chancellor Zephyrin made a final announcement. Let this day mark the beginning of the Galactic Youth Initiative. We commit to ensuring that every child, regardless of species, has access to the optimal development environment that humans have shown us is possible. Tekvar felt a profound sense of pride as he watched the younglings celebrate the decision. His nephew Kiptar bounded over, followed by his diverse group of friends. Uncle Thek, does this mean all kids everywhere will get to grow up like we did? Yes, little one. Tekvar replied, his voice thick with emotion. Every child in the galaxy will have the chance to become their best possible self. As the assembly dispersed, species representatives clustering around the human researchers to begin planning implementation, Tekvar realized they were witnessing the birth of a truly galactic civilization, one where every being's potential could be recognized, nurtured, and celebrated. The humans had given them more than better child development techniques. They had given them a future where diversity was strength, where differences were resources, and where every young being could grow up believing they belonged in the vast tapestry of galactic society. 25 years later, Captain Kiptar of the first truly integrated galactic vessel stood on the bridge of the USS Harmony, watching his mixed-species crew work together with an efficiency and creativity that would have seemed impossible to the previous generation. The ship itself was a testament to what the galaxy had become. Its design incorporated crystalline energy harmonics, aquan flow dynamics, Volcari structural engineering, and human adaptive systems, creating something far superior to what any single species could have achieved alone. Captain, his first officer, Lieutenant Commander Rilnath, reported from her station. The young Zeltharian had grown up in one of the first integrated development centers and displayed the enhanced empathy and creative thinking that had become characteristic of the new generation. We're receiving a distress signal from the Outer Rim. A previously unknown species is requesting assistance with what they describe as young ones in crisis. Kiptar smiled, his silver fur now marked with the blue streaks that indicated a veteran of interspecies cooperation. This was exactly the kind of situation the Harmony had been designed for. As the galaxy's first rapid response vessel for species contact and youth crisis intervention, they had helped over 50 newly discovered civilizations integrate into galactic society. Set course for the signal source, he commanded, and prepare the youth specialist teams for deployment. As the ship changed course, Kiptar walked through corridors that hummed with activity. In the ship's development centers, children from dozens of species learned and played together under the guidance of specialists trained in human development principles. These weren't just passengers, they were junior crew members, learning navigation, engineering, and diplomacy through hands-on experience that would have horrified the adults of previous generations. The ship's head of youth development, Dr. Chen Martinez, the daughter of the original researchers who had discovered the human gift, met him in the briefing room. Around the table sat representatives from every major species group, but more importantly, several teenage beings who had volunteered to serve as cultural ambassadors for first contact situations. What do we know about the distress call? Dr. Chen Martinez asked as the data appeared on the central display. Species designation unknown, calling themselves the Mothkari, Lieutenant Commander Rilnath reported. They've achieved faster than light travel, but seem to be experiencing some kind of crisis with their young. Their message was fragmentary, but they mentioned collective failure and loss of next generation. Shendar, now a full admiral but serving on this mission as a youth behavior specialist, leaned forward. His scarred hide told the story of a distinguished military career, but his eyes held the empathy that human-influenced upbringing had given him. Sounds familiar. Remember the Talniri situation 3 years ago? Their young were becoming aggressive and uncooperative because traditional methods weren't working in their new space-based environment. Kira, a young Aquan who served as one of the ship's cultural adaptation specialists, added her perspective. Or the Vexnan crisis, where technological advancement was outpacing their ability to prepare their children for the new world they were creating. These young beings spoke with the confidence and wisdom that had become standard among the integrated generation. They had grown up understanding that every species faced similar challenges, just expressed in different ways. Captain, came a voice from the ship's communication system. It was his uncle, former Commander Tekvar, now serving as Director Emeritus of Galactic Youth Services from his retirement aboard the Harmony. I've been reviewing our historical databases. The Mothkari are mentioned in some of the oldest galactic records, but they disappeared from contact over 1,000 years ago. Kiptar felt the familiar thrill of a truly challenging first contact situation. Uncle, are you suggesting they've been isolated for a millennium? It's possible, which would mean they've been dealing with whatever crisis they're facing completely alone. The implications were staggering. A species that had been struggling with youth development issues for 1,000 years, cut off from any outside assistance or perspective. Kiptar could only imagine what kind of cultural trauma might have accumulated over so many generations. Estimated arrival in 6 hours, the navigation officer reported. All departments, prepare for first contact protocols, Kiptar announced. Dr. Chen Martinez, I want the full youth crisis response team ready. We don't know what we're going to find, but if their message is accurate, an entire species' future might depend on what we do in the next few days. As the ship raced through hyperspace toward the distress signal, Kiptar found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. It had all started with 7 frightened cubs finding their way to human quarters, seeking something they couldn't even name. Now, a quarter century later, that simple incident had evolved into a galactic civilization dedicated to ensuring that no young being, anywhere in the universe, would have to face their challenges alone. The bridge received another transmission from the Mothkari, stronger now as they approached. The alien voice was filled with desperation. Unknown vessels, we are grateful for your response. Our children, they no longer want to learn our ways. They reject our teachings, our traditions, our very identity as a people. We fear we are watching our civilization die. Please, if you have any knowledge of how to reach the young when they have given up hope, we beg for your assistance. Kiptar exchanged glances with his integrated crew. They had heard similar pleas dozens of times from species across the galaxy. The specific details varied, but the underlying problem was always the same. Young beings who were failing to thrive because their needs weren't being met. Their potential wasn't being recognized, or their voices weren't being heard. All stations. Red alert for humanitarian assistance, Kiptar commanded. We're going to save a civilization. As the USS Harmony dropped out of hyperspace into the Mothkari system, Kiptar smiled, thinking of Dr. Chen and all the humans who had started this revolution in how the galaxy thought about its young. They had given every species the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that no child had to suffer alone, no potential had to go unrealized, and no species had to face the future without the full capabilities of their next generation. The Mothkari crisis would be resolved, just like all the others. Because that's what the galaxy did now. It protected and nurtured its young, all of them, regardless of species, origin, or the challenges they faced. In the end, that simple truth had changed everything. The humans had shown them that the future of any civilization wasn't determined by its technology, its military might, or its resources. It was determined by how well it cared for its children. And now, no child in the galaxy would ever have to wake up without someone who understood how to help them sleep peacefully, grow confidently, and reach for their dreams without fear.